Hey everybody, welcome into the Auto Rhythm Fantasy Studios. I'm your host, Jamie, and I have a lovely guest with me today. I got JT Brew from Fantasy in Frames. Welcome in.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yes, I know it's been fun. I've been watching some of your shows. I love what you got going on over there, and and the guy we are talking about today, we kind of clicked on that. So I'm like, well, hell, I'll just reach out and like, hey, let's talk about the guy we're going to talk about today. And I was pretty stoked about it. But anyways, make sure you guys like and subscribe to the channel. Follow all of our stuff down below. We have YouTube, Spotify for all those audios places. We have Instagram, and we do have a Discord too as well, which it's all right. But yeah, JT, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on the X or Twitter at JT Orange. I post all my stuff up there, my stories. All of our shows go live on Twitter as well. I host the Stew with JT Brew on Fantasy and Frames. That's kind of our college betting, NFL betting show during the season. Now in the off season, I do a lot of college football draft stuff. So we just get in the draft, we talk college football, talk draft, do a lot of those things. And then also on Fantasy and Frames, I get on with my buddy John McGlynn, who hosts the Dynasty Evaluation. We chatted up about what's going on in the NFL every week for fantasy. And then I also do a show called Shoot the Gap on Fantasy Frames with Jorge. We talk IDP for those people in IDP defensive leagues, individual defenders. We love that stuff. So we do that on Wednesday night. So I do a little bit of everything. I play every type of fantasy league possible. So I do it all. And then I also write for Fantrax and for DLF, Dynasty League Football. So both those sites, you can find my writing on there. And then my fades and plays article comes out every week on fantasyandframes.com. You can go there and check out who I'm saying to play on the defensive side of the ball.
Yes, and it seems like a lot because we were just talking before we got going. I'm like, I don't know how you can handle all that, but I mean, hey,
I added quite a few things to the repertoire this year, so it's been a fun season, but it's been a really busy season this year for me. So I'm gonna have to definitely figure out timing wise next year a little bit more because I just kind of jumped in and kept taking on more and more and more this year, and I was like, man, I'm running out of time on a lot of these things. I've had some
hey,
days where man, I do like 8 or 9 hours of podcasts in one day before. So
I don't
it's
know if
making
I
me
can.
crazy, but it's been a fun year though.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do that. I mean, 2 hours is my max, and I'm like, yep, I'm done. I don't know if I can do those marathons, but maybe, who knows? But
The
yeah.
one good thing for me is I'm talking about different subjects all the time. So it's not like I'm just saying the same thing over and over and over again. So that does help a little bit.
Yes. So everybody, you're probably wondering, wow, what are we doing? Well, we're actually diving into college spotlights. So I here at Auto Rhythm, we're going to try to put out as many spotlights as we can before the NFL draft. And my co-host, and I'll try to get a guest on here and there, try to reach out to other individuals, and who knows, maybe JT has another guy he wants to talk about, and we can collaborate on those. So we're going to try to put out as many spotlights as we can, and we'll give you our best analysis on some of these guys, especially when it comes to NFL Dynasty rookie drafts as well, and to what our thoughts of him during his college season too as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, you let me know anybody you want to talk about. I'm happy to jump on and chat it up. There's very few guys I haven't seen at some point throughout the year.
Yeah, my buddy said there's a few guys that are off the list, and I'm like, okay, I'll make sure not to put those out there for anybody else because those are the guys he wants to talk about, and so I'm like, well, we're gonna talk about a little bit about Kyle McCord today, and I was pretty happy about that. I'm like, ooh, I like this guy. I think this guy is very very underrated, and I've a very good sleeper. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'd love Kyle McCord. I'm a Syracuse guy. I got my master's from Syracuse. I grew up a Syracuse fan. That's why the JT Orange. I've had that was my email I made up in high school and then into college. I was a big Syracuse Orange. Marvin Harrison's my all-time favorite player Love Marvin Harrison, so go way back with him, Donovan McNabb, all those guys back in the Syracuse days. So followed Syracuse for a long time, and then, like I said, got my master's degree in broadcast journalism from there as well. So just kind of always followed and stuck with the Qs. So we got Kyle McCord and the transfer portal from Ohio State. I, like a lot of Syracuse fans, were pumped. I thought it was just an absolute great get. I know Ohio State fans. I've got a cousin that went to Ohio State. My roommate at Syracuse went to Ohio State. So like I know a ton of Ohio State people. And they were down on him. And I was like, man, I just think he's better than he's getting credited for. He was a really good high school prospect. He had some tough shoes to fill at Ohio State. I mean,
Yeah,
he
I
had
I gotta agree.
unbelievable quarterbacks in front of him. And so I think when he came in and started that first year, I think everybody thought they were expecting, a Heisman candidate. And when he wasn't, they were just like, oh, well, that's what we get every year at Ohio State now, don't we? And I'm like, well, I mean, they've had a lot of them, but it's you just not everybody can be CJ Stroud. Not everybody can be
Oh,
that.
yeah,
And
and
so I just
yeah,
think he had unfair expectations, I think,
yeah.
on top of him when he went to Ohio State.
And that's what we say here too. What to think of, we think about some of the rookies that were, in this college year. We had, Dylan from Nebraska. We had Sam from, the Sun Devils, and I'm sure there's a few other guys I'm not mentioning, but you have to think about that. These kids got big shoes to fill in right away when they come in
Mhm.
there. It's just like they can't do that right away. It's going to take
Well,
them
and
some
even
time
the
to.
expectations are always so high. I think
Mhm.
sometimes people just get in their head that these guys should be just lights out right away. And I'm like, these guys are 17, 18, 19 years old. You gotta give them a chance to learn and grow a little bit. I
Yeah.
mean, people forget. It's not 10, 15, 20 years ago that guys were coming in and sitting till their junior, senior year before they were getting a start. And now people want these guys as 4 or 5 star freshmen to come in and be the man right off the bat. It's just like, now, does it happen
Mhm.
occasionally? Occasionally it does happen, but
Yep.
it's occasionally like, and people want it to be every guy. And so, especially in the fantasy space. And I think people get and they start looking at the draft. They're like, well, he didn't
Yeah.
play as a freshman, or he sat behind this guy. And they're like, well, he's done. He's off my list. I'm never going to draft him. And I'm like,
Yeah.
sometimes guys just don't come in and get it right away, or they don't fit a coach's system, perfectly. And with some coaches, I coach high school football for a lot of years. Some coaches are just a little more adverse to playing younger players. They just are. Like, it's not that they're like totally against them. They just prefer, if it's even close, that they play the older guy. So all those things are factors I think you got to take in.
Yeah, I have to agree, and I think a lot of it too comes down to landing spot, the talent around them. I know you talked about, we talked on your show yesterday, you talked about, we mentioned the Texas to your last year's Texas and talent, I think a lot of that comes down to, the coaching too as well and talent. If they got the talent on there, that's gonna help the cause too.
Mhm.
When the thing about it, when I saw Kyle McCord, he entered, the portal and went to Syracuse, I'm like, "Yep, he's done. This is not gonna work out." But then that kinda gave me a little slap in the face. I was like, here's the crazy funny thing is I was actually watching, I think it was the ACC or something. It was a program. They were talking about the Syracuse and Kyle McCord coming in. I'm like, so that kind of changed my perspective a little bit. How this guy came in, he's a go getter, get to work, no bullshit kind of thing, and he wants to get in. So his work ethic is actually rather high. So I was like,
Mhm.
that kind of changed my perspective on him a little bit.
Yeah, he had a solid season at Ohio State. I mean, people look at it and they're just like, "Oh, he wasn't very good." Well, I think the difference was they weren't asking him to win a lot of games. They were just like, "Hey, we're really good on defense. We've got a ton of talent at wide receiver, got a ton of talent at running back. Like, just don't screw it up." I mean, that was kind of how it seemed like their approach at Ohio State was. And you got to look at this thing. The guy lost one game. He lost one game. The one game he lost to ended up being the national champions, who had the number one defense in the nation and one of the better defenses we've seen in the last 10 years in college football. And it's just like it felt like all the hate went towards Kyle McCord and all became his fault. And I'm like, I don't think it's all his. I don't know how it could be all his fault. And I've got into it with a bunch of Ohio State fans on Twitter over the last
I
year.
believe it.
And they're like, oh, McCord, he's a bum, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't think he's not a bum. I'm like, just because he lost one game to your rival. And again, I just think it goes back to expectations. Everybody now
Yes.
look at what they're doing this year. Look at Will Howard. Is everybody ripping Will Howard that he's a bum? He just lost to Michigan. No,
Yeah.
for some reason, they are backing Will Howard. If you get online and you talk one bad word about Will Howard, Ohio State fans lose their mind. They're like, he's the best quarterback in the nation. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, where was this love for Kyle McCord last year? Like they're
Right?
just hating on him, but they love Will Howard. And I'm like, guys, I hate to tell you this. I'm like, Kyle McCord's a better quarterback than Will Howard. They're like, no, you're full. Oh no. I'm like, he is. He's a better pro prospect. He's a better quarterback. They're like, oh, he just has good stats because he's on that bum Syracuse team playing ACC. I'm like, dude, the guy led the nation in passing. I don't
Yeah, he
care
did.
who you are. I don't care what league you play in. When you lead the nation in passing, so this is the other thing that's got me, and you get me going off on rants. But this is like they gave all the college football awards out last night, right? And they had
Oh,
all
yeah, I've
these
seen some of
awards,
those.
and all these guys won these awards. And then I see everybody on Twitter today, and they're like, "Well, he didn't lead the nation in any categories. He didn't lead the nation in this. He didn't. How did he win that award? He wasn't the number one statistical guy." No one said. No one's like, well, why didn't Kyle McCord win the Davey O'Brien Award? Why didn't Kyle McCord win Quarterback of the Year? Why didn't he win that? He had the most passing yards. So
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, so now we're just picking and choosing when stats matter and when they don't matter.
Yeah,
So,
and I
you
think that a
know,
lot of I think a
it,
lot of
it's
that
just it's
does
just
happen.
crazy to me how that works. I'm like, yes, you could be the best player in the nation without having the best stats. Guys play for teams and don't necessarily play a whole half if they're really good or they're
Right?
way up or they have other good players on the team. You don't have to go to that one player all the time. But I thought it was funny when I heard all these people making these arguments for
Uh,
running back of the year, who should win the quarterback, who should win the best wide receiver. The one was Travis Hunter. A bunch of people
yeah,
ripped
yeah,
Travis Hunter, which I loved it. I don't know if you saw my tweet today. I had a bet on Travis Hunter winning the Blitnikoff for best wide receiver. So
yeah.
bam, hit that war.
Ooh.
So that was a big one. I also had Ginty as the Doak Walker
Ah.
winner at the beginning of the year. So I hit both of those bets. So big on those. But I put those in. I was like, just because he didn't lead in any exact statistic, he was top 10 in like everything. But I didn't see one person come out and be like, why didn't Kyle McCord win Quarterback of the Year over Cam Ward, even though he
Yeah,
beat
yeah.
him? He beat him head to head and he had more passing yards than him. Oh, but nobody says that. I'm like, okay. So again, we're picking and choosing when stats matter and when they don't.
Well, you have to think about it too. I mean, Miami, they were loaded. I mean, they had the wide receivers to actually get Cam Ward to, where he was. So that's the thing about it. McCord not having no talent, two teams actually having better talent. It's a little understanding a little bit. It actually
Mhm.
proves, that a guy like McCord can actually come out, with the lesser talent a little bit to actually prove something to a lot of people.
Mhm. And I love Cam Ward. Cam Ward was a guy I had preseason as my QB3 coming into the draft. I loved Cam Ward. I love the fact that he went back to school. I mean, he was probably a day two, late day two, maybe day three guy. He went back to school. Now he's probably a top 10 pick. So I absolutely love it. But Syracuse put it all on Kyle McCord this year. I mean, it was all on Kyle McCord to run this offense and make this turnaround. And Syracuse, hate to say it, has not been a very good team the last decade. They have not been good. And for him to come around and get this team to 9-3 and legitimately, they probably should have been 10-2. The Stanford loss was just brutal. I mean, that was a brutally bad drive that they gave up at the end of the game and a field goal to lose it. So, I mean, they were a Stanford win away from being in the ACC championship game, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, well, right at the end, they actually came out and actually beat Miami, which I was like,
Mhm.
"What?" I mean, he went up again
It,
he actually had a nice he threw over 400 some odd yards that game, and I was like, "What?" was like, "No
Brought them
freaking
back
way,
from
dude."
21 nothing down. They were down
Yep.
21 nothing in that game. He came back, brought them back. Just an absolute for people that didn't get to watch the game, I feel bad for you because it was a battle. Him and Cam Ward were just going at it back and forth. It was a great, great college football game to watch.
I in my eyes, I thought that game was done and over with. I'm like, "Oh, Miami's going into the playoffs," and I'm like, "Oh,
Oh,
that's it." Oh,
I live bet Syracuse on that game. I'm not gonna lie. They came back and won it. I live bet them when they got down 21 nothing. I was like, they're gonna make a run at this thing and get back. I didn't know if they'd win it, but I knew they'd get back into that game. And they did. It was a nice run. I mean, I originally had taken them on the points because it was like 11 and a half, I think, to start. And I was like, man, this game's gonna be closer than people realize. The Cuse in the dome. I was like, they're going to be in this thing. But I mean, it was a monster game. I was trying to pull up the stats here. McCord threw for 380 and 3 touches in that game. Brought him back, huge game. Ward 390, 349 and 2 touches in that game. So, I mean, those guys really battled back and forth in a 42-38 game. I mean, it was awesome.
yeah. So let's kind of talk. Let's kind of swap here. Let's kind of think about dynasty here a little bit. No, we
Mhm.
kind of like what are our thoughts on Kyle McCord? If we don't get guys like Cam Ward or a Dalen Gabriel or a Milrow, maybe if we can't get some of those guys in dynasty rookies, is Kyle McCord a guy we could probably maybe take a look at and maybe draft him in a second round maybe?
Yeah, that so I think he's a day 2 guy right now. Now we'll see once we get going with all the combine stuff, him at the combine, see how he goes there as pro day, see if he moves up or down lists. I think he's a guy that's going to actually impress. I think he's a guy that coaches are going to like. I think they're going to think he's a smart kid, a hard worker. I just think they're going to see. I think he's one of those guys going to interview well just from all the things I've read and seen about him. So I think the biggest thing is going to come out is who decides to actually come out and who goes back to school and where he falls in this draft class. Because I could really see Kyle McCord being anywhere from QB 4 or 5 to QB 8 or 9 in this class, in this draft class, depending on who comes out and who goes back to school.
Yeah, and
If quite a few of the high end guys that just are, they're like, yeah, I could be a first rounder next year, but I'm like probably not going to be a first round this year. Go back to school. I could see him jumping up some draft lists. I think right now, if I had to put money on it, I'd say he's a third round draft pick with the upside of maybe sneaking into the late second round, depending on who has picks there and what teams maybe missed out on a QB in the first round. So if there's a couple guys that want to go QB, the guy they wanted isn't there, they decide they wait. I think he's one of those guys you could see go second, third round. Depending on where he lands, the chances, depending on where he lands, the chances of him getting a chance to start as a rookie are probably not great, but I definitely think he's a guy that's going to go in with high upside with a chance to play. I'm definitely going to have my eye on him in dynasty drafts. Probably in that mid to late second round. He's a guy I'm going to have my eye on. Definitely in super flex leagues, 2 QB leagues for sure. I'm
yeah,
going to be looking at him because even if he doesn't start, depending on where he ends up, I think he could be a very capable, solid backup. But he's also a guy that I think could earn his way into a starting role maybe 2 or 3 years down the road here, depending on what happens. So he's a guy. If I have bigger lineups, I'm willing to stash him on my taxi squad. I'm going to draft him. I'm going to stash him. I'm going to hold him and see kind of possibly what he can do. Um, Different draft classes, I think he could be a little higher. Again, if a lot of guys come out, I could see him being a little lower in this draft class. But it really, the NIL has changed a lot. A lot of these guys are
yeah,
getting a lot of money to stay in school. And if they're not going to be a guaranteed first rounder, I think you have to go back and look at Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders from last year. They're a great example
yeah,
of two
yep,
guys who were like, very, very edgy if they were going to maybe be the end of the first round. They're most likely going to be round 2 or round 3 picks last year. And both those guys went back to school and played themselves into top 10 picks and possibly top 5 picks for both of them. So I think you could see some guys like maybe like a Jalen Milroe from Alabama, a
Yeah.
Garrett
Yeah.
Nussmeier from LSU. I can see those guys going back to school because they're going, hey, I could be the 1-1 next year.
Yep.
If and
As
this year I might not. So that's where so McCord to me, depending on who comes out, I could see him going earlier in the draft. And if he goes top half of the second round in the real NFL draft, I think he's going to creep up in your fantasy drafts. I mean, I really do. I think you could see him going like end of the first round, beginning of the second round in super flex and 2 QB leagues.
yeah, as far as I think Nussmeier has confirmed that he's going back to LSU. So he's one guy out, and we know yours is kind of borderline. He might return too. So I mean, those kind of looking at that too. I
And
mean,
I'll
we
tell you right now, I like McCord better than Quinn Ewers. I really do. I know there are
I
people.
think
I
I
know I've said that to people, and they're like, "Are you crazy?" I'm like, I like McCord so much better than yours. I just think he's more consistent. I think you know
Yep.
what you're getting out of him. I just like his headspace. I like the way he plays. I to me, if it was taking Quinn Ewers in the first round or waiting and taking Kyle McCord in the second round as an NFL evaluator, I would be all over Kyle McCord in the second round over a first round pick on Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, I'll have to kind of agree with that. The more and more I was looking at it, I'm like, I mean, if you don't,
Ewers has got huge upside. He looks at times he looks like the guy everybody said he was going to be coming out of high school, but then there's times where you're like the injuries have piled up on him. He's
yeah,
not looked great in a lot of circumstances. He's just one of those things. Like he's gonna be a big swing for somebody. He's being a guy that if somebody takes him, he could hit, and you'd be like, "Yep, I'm the smartest GM ever that I took him when everybody else was worried about him." Or he's a guy that you could take and end up losing your job because you drafted him, and then he ends up not panning out, and you're in trouble.
yeah, for sure. In some team landing spots, I got I was looking at the second and third rounds a little bit. Teams that are kind of needy. We got the Giants, Raiders, and Panthers are all teams that are kind of needy. And it all depends on what they do in the first round too. So I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, these team landings are okay, but I mean, not the best. But I mean, they got I know the Panthers got Leggett, so they're kind of working some pieces around there. The Raiders, I really don't know. They lost a lot of pieces too as well. I don't, it's I'm like, eh. The Giants, they do got pieces too as well though.
Well, and then some of these teams, they're gonna draft high. They're gonna get nice players. They just got to make sure they're drafting the right players. And you know what? Here's the other thing too: is if somebody decides they're gonna take like a Jalen Milroe, say he comes out and somebody takes him in the first round. Now, would I be shocked if that same team came back and took Kyle McCord in like the second or third round? I wouldn't because Milroe, like huge upside. The guy can run,
Oh yeah,
but
most
he's a
definitely.
project. He's a project. Could is I mean, I always talk about this. We can go back to the old Washington Redskins. They took, they went and took RG3 at the top of the draft, and boom, where did they come back? Round 3, we're taking Kirk Cousins. And people are like, why would you take Cousins if you just took a guy in the top 3? Why would you draft another rookie quarterback? You're covering yourself. We've seen it. I mean, your
Yeah, most
quarterback gets hurt in
definitely.
the NFL, you're toast if you don't have a decent backup. I could see a team that goes out on a limb and takes a little more of a guy that's a little more of a project, and I'm going to take the senior. I'm going to take the older player McCord that's kind of proved himself to kind of maybe back him up. So I can see a bunch of teams being interested in him. I really could.
Yeah, for me, I think it's gonna come down to some team landing spots for sure if he gets the opportunity to. And my composition, I know I mentioned this on your show a couple times, is Kirk Cousins. And I mentioned this on another show, and they're like, "What? No way." And I'm like, come on, look at his
I
stats. A
I
guy
think
who's
he's super similar to a Kirk Cousins. When you brought that up, I was like, I love that comp. I love that comp. He plays like him. He's just kind of got that mindset of a Cousins. He's not a guy that's gonna like come out and just blow you away physically. Like Cousins doesn't come out and win any physical awards on what he's doing, but he's a guy who's smart. He knows where the ball is supposed to be. He has a good enough arm, which I think McCord has a good enough arm. He's not gonna be He's not a guy like a Will Levis that's you're going to go out there and be like, oh man, look at that guy's muscles, look at the arm strength. He's just not
You're
he's not going to blow you away like that. But he's a guy that he's also not going to have all the mistakes that like a Will Levis makes. And
yeah.
so I know I got into this talk to people earlier this year. They're like, oh, he threw 12 picks this year. And everybody's like, oh, he threw 12 picks. I'm like, if you go back and watch those interceptions, he threw 5 interceptions in that Pittsburgh game. And
Yep.
if you just looked at the highlights and you just looked at the stats, you were like, he's awful. But if you actually watch the game, it was a ton of random interceptions, like deflections. He hit guys that should have made the catch. It bounced off their hands, got picked.
Yep.
There was another pick where the ball went straight up in the air and the guy was laying on his back.
Yeah, I think I
And the
saw
ball
that
fell in
too.
his hands and he made the pick. So when people are like, oh, he threw 12 picks, he threw 5 picks in that one game. He
Yeah.
also brought them back in that game. They
Yeah,
lost,
he
but
did.
he still threw for 321 yards in that game after the 5 picks. Now, here's why I love about Kyle McCord. After he threw the 5 picks, threw 1 pick the next game against Virginia Tech, did not throw an interception the last 4 weeks of the season against pretty good defenses, did not throw another pick. So you get rid of the 5 pick Pittsburgh game, you get rid of that, he throws 7 interceptions on the year.
Yeah,
29 TDs, 7 picks. He had 24 and 6 the year before. I mean,
yep.
that's right on. That's right on. 6, 7 picks is realistic, especially when you want to break it down the touchdown ratio and how many attempts he threw this year. He
Yeah,
threw the
sure.
ball a ton this year. So
He
if
did.
you take him down to single digits after if you get rid of that one game, he didn't throw more than 2 picks in any other game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was the only game he didn't throw a touchdown this year. Was that game when he threw the 5 picks where they just got way behind after the 3 pick sixes. It was just a nightmare of a game for them. That Pittsburgh game, everything went wrong. You tossed that one really bad game that was just kind of an out of nowhere game. He was very solid all year long. I think he had, looking back at stats, he had 1 game he threw under 300 yards all year.
Yep.
One
Yep.
single game, and it was the Virginia Tech game the next week where he threw for 280 and 2 touches.
Yeah.
So
So
that was the only game he threw under that. He broke every Syracuse passing record, and Syracuse has had some outstanding quarterbacks in their history. He broke every Syracuse passing record this year.
that's nuts. I know there was another guy last year who broke one of their. There was another guy I can't think of who actually broke a team's passing record or something last year or rushing. I can't remember who it was, or maybe it was a receiving record. Oh, it's probably that's right. It was can UTSA Roadrunner. I kind of comped him to kind of a mini CD Lamb, but he broke
Oh,
their.
yeah. So they had all kinds of good wide receivers. Zachariah Franklin was one of the guys that was there when they were having that huge run. He ended up transferring to Ole Miss. Didn't work out there, but ended up at
Yeah,
Illinois this year and had a solid year at Illinois. But they had 2 or 3 really good wideouts at UTSA the last couple of years.
Cephas is the guy I was
Yeah,
thinking of.
Cephas. Yep. Him and Franklin were a CFF dream. If you played college fantasy football, they
Ye
were awesome.
Yep.
You wanted those guys on your team, and I can't believe I'm blanking on their QB right now. I'm gonna have to look him up, but their quarterback
Yep.
was legit the lefty. He was awesome.
Yeah, it's funny to think about because I wrote down Cousins had 4 interceptions week 13 against the Rams. So I mean it's similar little qualities a little bit. I was looking back. Other than that, I was on the game that McCord messed up on was against Pitt, and Cousins against the Rams. So I was like, well, I mean these guys are pretty similar. I like the fact that he's actually thrown over 300 some odd yards. So I mean I don't know. Could we say he's a Jameis Winston, a guy down in Florida where he's just chucking the ball down the field? Maybe not. Maybe
I
a little
see.
bit better than Jameis Winston.
I think he takes care of the ball so much better.
Yeah,
I mean, he's not a turnover machine like Jameis is. And I mean, that's the issue with Jameis. He's got that high upside. I think that, Cousins has thrown picks this year, but if you look in his career, he isn't a real high interception guy for his career. Now he's struggled a bit
yeah,
this year. I think, being a little bit older, not being able to really plant off that Achilles, that torn Achilles, I think has caused him to try to force stuff with his arm a little more. than he has in the past. But that's what I'm saying. Other than that, if you get rid of that 5 interception game, McCord has done an excellent job of taking care of the ball throughout his career.
Yep, and I'll have to agree with that too. So to kind of wrap up, I think he's a day two guy, maybe around 2 or 3. We gave you guys a couple of landing spots. Our dynasty value. I think like I think he's kind of in the middle. He's not really quite a 10. He's kind of in the middle. He's kind of a workhorse too. He's comes on the landing spot. No rushing value at all. I mean, he had negative 58 yards, he gave you just a couple rushing touchdowns there, but he's a great workhorse in our eyes. And is there anything else you want to mention on Kyle McCord before we get up
The
out of
guy I
here?
was thinking about, sorry, was Frank Harris from UTSA. He was the QB. Yeah, but McCord's a guy. He's definitely the guy to keep an eye on through the draft process here. To see what teams like him, how he kind of performs at the combine. I think is going to say a lot about him. Um, he's a guy that I don't think people that are paying attention to college football probably are paying attention to him at all when it comes to fantasy drafts. I know we talked about before the show. He was drafted in super small percentage of Fantrax leagues. I think you said it was like 8%. I had
Yes.
him on 8 out of 10 teams. So that tells you how much I thought Kyle McCord was going to be good this year. Now, did I think he was going to have the season he had? I didn't think he was going to lead the country in passing. I thought he would be really good. But they really they leaned on him, and that tells you what the coaching staff thought about his talent. They came in and said he immediately became the leader of the team. He's a guy that all the guys got behind, and they just went out there and said, "Hey, we trust you to get it done for us." I think NFL teams are going to like that. I think they're going to see what he put up with at Ohio State, saw that he played at a high level at Ohio State. Maybe got a little unfairly criticized for his play there, and then saw what he was able
Yeah.
to do at Syracuse. I think that's going to put him high on some GM's lists. So he's definitely a guy. I hope he goes high in the draft. I don't want him to go too high because I want him in a ton of drafts. But I
Mm,
definitely think he's a guy that I think if teams miss out on those top 2, 3, 4 QBs in the first round, I think he's going to be one of the first guys that teams start eyeing in that second, third round of drafts.
yeah, I'll have to agree with you. I mean, I got him kind of ranked 6th right now with, Nussmeier kind of going out. So he's kind of right in there in that eyeball. So, I mean, if you can't get Ward, Shador, I mean, I'm not really a Shador fan, but, if Miro does come out, he's that dual threat kind of guy that, most of us kind of like, especially with that running upside. And then, just, Gabriel a little bit ahead of him too as well. So, that's,
Yeah, I think it's going to be real close. If I don't have my rankings right in front of me, but my kind of off top of my head list of where I've been at, I've got Shedeur Sanders at QB1, but I've had him at QB1 for 2 years. I told everybody I thought he'd be QB1 in this class. I've got Cam Ward at QB2. He was my number 3 coming in behind Carson Beck. Carson Beck's dropped for me. I don't think
Mm,
he's even close to a first
yeah.
round guy. It'd be interesting if he even comes out now. So I think it's at Sanders 1. I think it's Ward 2 for me. I think Drew Allar is number 3 if he comes out. I know he's a guy that is very, people are very divisive on him. They either think he's really good or they think he's terrible. But I think Allar's 3 for me. If Milrow comes out, he's 4 for me. I would have McCord at 5 and Ewers at 6. If Ewers comes out, he would actually be behind McCord for me. So I think it's going to be right in that mix. If that's what I'm saying. If Milrow doesn't come out, I to me, McCord gets in that top 5, maybe up to even 4 for me behind those top 3 guys. So it really is going to depend. I've got McCord over Gabriel. I think Dylan Gabriel
Gotcha.
is really good. I think McCord, NFL wise, I think he's got a higher NFL ceiling to me personally. I think Gabriel's going to have to be in just the perfect situation for him
Yeah.
in a team that's going to have to set the offense up exactly for him. I think he's like a Kyle Murray type. Like they need to set it up specifically for him. I think McCord can fit in a lot of offenses. So I like him in that reason a little bit better. But again, we'll figure out who comes out and who doesn't. But don't be surprised if guys go back to school and Kyle McCord starts being talked about as a top 5 QB in this draft class.
Yep, and, you heard it here at Otter Rhythm Fantasy, that Kyle McCord is high on our list, and you heard it from JT Brew from Fantasy and Frames. So we'll get this wrapped up out of here, and make sure you follow JT Brew and the guys over there at Fantasy and Frames. They do great work over there. I'm always, up in the comments saying something over there, like, snitch,
Yeah, we
snitch
appreciate
about
you joining the show, man, and jumping on and throwing in your 2 cents. It's always awesome.
Yeah. Hey, at least I kinda converted you to, thinking about, some other teams on your betting show last night, Arizona, and they're like,
Absolutely, absolutely.
"Ooh." So, yeah, make sure you follow us, uh, let's see, I'm fumbling now. Oh, here, I'll just pull this up quick. It'll just make it a lot easier for me. I'm like, okay, here we go." Okay. Make sure you follow us on Spotify, YouTube, the X's, and we got the Discord and Instagram, all that fun stuff. And our college spotlights will be. I haven't really quite decided if I should put out 2 episodes, Tuesday and a Saturday. I was thinking maybe just Saturday, but I might just leave it for Saturdays. I don't know. I don't know yet. But you have to stay tuned for our X. I'll put that out there, and on our Discord too as well. So if you guys want to follow us over there, it'd be a greatly appreciate it. Like and subscribe, and share this around because we gave you guys some great information about Colin McCord and a guy that could be on the rise. So, all right, everybody, we appreciate JT. I appreciate you jumping on with me talking about
Absolutely, thank you.
Colin McCord. It was fun. It was a blast, and we'll catch you guys next time. Later.